The human ship Meridian hung in space like a metal whale beside the massive Draconian station. Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead as he crawled through another maintenance tunnel. The air recycling system needed fixing again, and as usual, the job fell to him. Jake was 28 years old and had been working on ships for 6 years. Came from a small farm in Montana where his family raised cattle. Space travel was never his dream, but the pay was good and someone had to do the dirty work. His hands were rough from years of fixing pipes and electrical systems. His clothes were always stained with grease, and most of the important people on the ship barely noticed he existed above him. In the fancy diplomatic quarters, Ambassador Victoria Hamilton was having the most important meeting of her career. Jake could hear voices through the metal walls as he worked. Ow. The Draconians were not easy allies to make. They were proud beings who looked like enormous dragons from old Earth stories. Their scales shone like gold and silver, and they were twice as tall as humans when they stood up straight. The Draconian homeworld of Paraxis Prime was a sight to see. Jake had caught glimpses of it through the small windows in the maintenance areas. The planet glowed red and orange like a burning coal. Massive cities carved into mountainsides sparkled with lights. Flying creatures that looked like the dragons of legend soared between tall spires that reached toward the stars. For 3 months, Ambassador Hamilton had been trying to convince the Draconian Empire to join humanity in a war against a common enemy. The Void Seekers were machines that destroyed planets and turned everything into more machines. They had already eaten 12 human colonies and were heading toward Draconian space. Humanity needed allies, and the Draconians were among the strongest. Warriors in the galaxy, but the dragons were stubborn. They believed they were superior to all other species. Their empire had lasted for thousands of years. They had never needed help from anyone, especially not from young species like humans, who had only been in space for a few hundred years. Jake finished replacing a broken filter and started crawling toward the next section. As he moved, he heard shouting from the diplomatic area. Even through the thick walls, he could tell something was very wrong. The crisis had started 3 days ago. The Draconian Emperor Zorith, the Golden, had 3 offspring who had just hatched from their eggs. Dragon babies were rare and precious. In Draconian culture, the health of royal children was seen as a sign from their gods. It's about the future of the empire. But the 3 baby dragons were sick. They would not eat anything. They barely moved. The royal doctors tried everything they knew, but nothing worked. The little dragons grew weaker each day. Emperor Zorith was desperate. Despite his pride, he asked the humans for help. Advanced medical technology could save his children. If the babies died, it would be seen as a terrible omen. The alliance talks would end, and the Draconians might even blame humanity for bringing bad luck. Dr. Lisa Park was the best xenobiologist on the Meridian. She studied alien life forms and had saved many strange creatures during her career. She had been working around the clock to help the dragon babies. But so far, nothing worked. Jake crawled out of the maintenance tunnel and stood up in a storage room. His back ached from hours of crawling through tight spaces. He heard footsteps in the corridor outside and pressed his ear to the door. "The situation is getting worse," said a voice he recognized as Dr. Park. She sounded tired and worried. "Ow!" "Much time do we have?" asked another voice. This was Captain Ryan Beck, the man who commanded the Meridian. "Maybe 2 days," Dr. Park replied. "The pups are barely breathing now. I've tried every medicine we have. I've analyzed their blood, their scales, even the air they breathe. Nothing seems wrong, but they're dying anyway." "And if they die?" Captain Beck asked quietly. "The Emperor will blame us," Dr. Park said. "He'll think our presence caused this. The alliance will be over before it starts. Worse, he might declare war on humanity out of grief and anger." Felt a chill run down his spine. He was just a maintenance worker, but he understood what this meant. If the dragons became enemies instead of allies, humanity would face the Void Seekers alone. Billions of people might die. The footsteps moved away, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts. He had never seen the dragon babies, but he felt sorry for them anyway. Back on his family's farm, he had helped deliver calves and foals. He knew what it was like to watch young animals suffer. Jake picked up his tool bag and headed toward the medical section. His next job was to check the air filters in that area. It was routine work that would take him near where the dragon babies were being kept. The medical bay was quieter than usual. Most of the staff were either sleeping or working in other parts of the ship. Jake found the access panel he needed and started removing screws. Through the thin wall, he could hear soft, sad sounds. The baby dragons were whimpering like sick puppies. Jake had heard those sounds before. On the farm, young animals made similar noises when they were dying. It was one of the saddest sounds in the world. He paused in his work, listening to the weak cries from the other side of the wall. Without thinking about protocols or rules, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He finished his repair work quickly and quietly made his way toward the room where the dragon babies were kept. He told himself he just wanted to see them once, to understand what all the fuss was about. He had no idea that this simple choice would soon make him the most important person on either ship. Jake stood outside the medical containment room for several minutes. He could hear the soft whimpering sounds from inside, and they reminded him of the time his family's barn cat had kittens that got sick. 3 of them had died despite his mother's best efforts to save them. The door was not locked. Medical staff came and went all day, so security was not tight. Jake pressed his hand against the door panel, and it slid open with a quiet hiss. The room was dimly lit with soft blue lights. In the center were 3 glass containers, each one about the size of a large doghouse. Inside each container was a baby dragon, and Jake caught his breath when he saw them. The first pup had bronze-colored scales that should have gleamed like new pennies, but now they looked dull and lifeless. The second had scales of silver blue, like storm clouds, and the third was covered in deep gray scales like ash from a fire. All 3 were smaller than Jake had expected, maybe the size of golden retriever puppies. But with long necks and tiny wings folded against their backs, the bronze pup lifted its head slightly when Jake entered. Its golden eyes were cloudy with sickness, but they focused on him with what seemed like curiosity. Jake had never seen anything so beautiful or so sad. "Hey there, little guy," Jake whispered, the same way he used to talk to scared animals on the farm. "You're not feeling too good, are you?" The baby dragon made a soft chirping sound, almost like a bird. The other 2 pups stirred in their containers, turning their heads toward Jake. For the first time in days, according to the medical reports he had overheard, all 3 were alert and paying attention to something. Jake approached the containers, slowly. He had no idea what he was doing, but something about the way the pups looked at him made him want to help. Their eyes seemed to plead with him, as if they knew he was different from all the other humans who had tried to help them. "You guys are pretty special, aren't you?" Jake said softly. "Your dad is the emperor of a whole planet. You probably live in a palace made of gold and diamonds." The bronze pup chirped again, and this time the sound was stronger. The silver blue pup lifted its head higher, and the gray one actually moved to the front of its container. Pressing its tiny snout against the glass, Jake looked around the room. There were charts on the walls showing what the pups should be eating, how much they should weigh, and what their vital signs should look like. Everything was written in medical language that Jake barely understood, but he could see that all the numbers were wrong. The pups were dying and no one knew why. On a table near the containers were bowls of expensive food that the Draconians had brought from their homeworld. There were also plates of synthetic nutrients that the human medical team had prepared. Nothing had been touched. Jake felt thirsty after his long shift in the maintenance tunnels. He pulled out his water bottle and took a sip. The bronze pup watched him drink and made another chirping sound, this one almost like a question. "Oh, you want some water?" Jake asked. He looked around for something to give the pup water with, but all the medical equipment looked too complicated. The feeding tubes and nutrient dispensers were designed by experts who knew what they were doing. Jake was just a maintenance worker who fixed broken things, but the pup kept watching him, and Jake could not ignore the pleading look in its golden eyes. He found a small, clean cup on the medical table and poured some water from his bottle into it. The containment unit had a small opening where medical staff could insert instruments. Jake carefully poured the water through the opening. The bronze pup immediately crawled over to the water and began drinking eagerly. The sound of its tiny tongue lapping up the water was the first normal sound Jake had heard from any of the pups. "Well, I'll be," Jake muttered. "You were just thirsty." The other two pups began moving around in their containers, making soft sounds that Jake realized were probably their way of asking for water too. He gave them each some water from his bottle, and they drank just as eagerly as the first one. For the first time in days, the baby dragons seemed to have some energy. They moved around their containers, stretched their tiny wings, and looked at Jake with bright, alert eyes. The bronze pup even tried to climb up the side of its container to get closer to him. Jake sat down on the floor next to the containers, so he could be at the same level as the pups. They all crowded to the sides of their containers closest to him, pressing their snouts against the glass and making soft, happy sounds. "You guys are lonely, aren't you?" Jake said. "All these smart people trying to help you, but nobody just sits with you." He thought about the animals on his family's farm. When they got sick, sometimes medicine helped, but often they just needed someone to stay with them. His mother always said that animals could sense when people cared about them, and that caring was sometimes the best medicine of all. Jake pulled his lunch from his tool bag. It was nothing fancy, just a sandwich with processed meat and cheese and an apple. He was about to take a bite when the bronze pup made another chirping sound and reached one tiny claw toward the sandwich. "You want to try this?" Jake asked. "I don't think this is on your fancy diet plan." He tore off a small piece of the meat and carefully pushed it through the opening in the container. The bronze pup sniffed it carefully, then took a tiny bite. Its eyes widened, and it quickly ate the rest of the piece. Jake looked at the untouched bowls of expensive dragon food, then at the pup, eagerly waiting for more of his simple sandwich. He shook his head and smiled. "You guys have expensive taste, but you want truck stop food," he said. "I get it. Sometimes simple is better." He fed small pieces of his sandwich to all three pups, and they ate hungrily. For the first time since they had gotten sick, the baby dragons were eating something. Jake finished feeding them his lunch and gave them more water. The pups curled up in their containers, looking more comfortable than they had in days. Jake stood up to leave, but the bronze pup made a sad sound and pressed against the glass. All three pups watched him with pleading eyes, as if they knew he was about to go away. "I'll come back," Jake promised. "I've got more work to do tomorrow. Maybe I'll bring you guys a better lunch." As he left the room, Jake had no idea that he had just solved a mystery that had baffled the best doctors in human space. The baby dragons were not sick from disease or poison. They were dying from something much simpler and much more serious. They were dying from loneliness, and Jake Morrison was the only person who could save them. Jake woke up the next morning to loud voices in the corridor outside his small room. He could hear people running and shouting, which was unusual on the Meridian. The ship was normally quiet in the early hours. He got dressed quickly and stepped into the hallway. Dr. Park rushed past him, carrying a medical scanner and looking excited. Behind her came two other doctors and a nurse, all heading toward the medical bay. "What's going on?" Jake asked one of the security guards. "The dragon pups," the guard said with a big smile. "They're eating. First time in a week, Dr. Park thinks. They might actually survive." Jake felt a warm feeling in his chest. He was glad the little dragons were doing better, but he wondered if anyone knew why they had suddenly started eating. He decided not to mention his visit to their room the night before. Nobody would believe that his simple sandwich had helped when all the fancy medical treatments had failed. Jake went to the cafeteria for breakfast, found it buzzing with excited conversations. Everyone was talking about the dragon pups and what this might mean for the Alliance talks. If the Emperor's children lived, maybe he would be grateful enough to join humanity in the fight against the Void Seekers. After breakfast, Jake went to work as usual. He had to repair some damaged power cables in the lower decks. The work was routine, but he kept thinking about the three little dragons. He wondered if they remembered him, or if they were still eating the food the doctors gave them. Around lunchtime, Jake heard his name called over the ship's communication system. "Jake Morrison, report to Medical Bay immediately." His heart started beating faster. Had someone found out about his unauthorized visit to the dragon pups? When Jake arrived at the medical bay, he found it crowded with people. Dr. Park was there, along with Captain Beck, Ambassador Hamilton, and several other important officers. They all looked at him as he entered, and Jake felt very uncomfortable. "Morrison," Captain Beck said, "Dr. Park has some questions for you." Dr. Park stepped forward. It was a small woman with kind eyes, but she looked puzzled. "Jake, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Did you visit the dragon pups yesterday evening?" Jake's face turned red. He had been caught. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "I was doing maintenance work nearby, and I heard them crying. I just wanted to see them. Did you give them anything?" Dr. Park asked. "Food, water, anything at all?" Jake nodded. "I gave them some of my water, and they seemed thirsty. Then I shared my sandwich with them, just small pieces. I know I probably broke some rules, but they looked so sad." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Ambassador Hamilton spoke up. "Jake, you may have saved not only those dragon pups, but this entire alliance. Dr. Park, please explain what you discovered." Dr. Park pulled up some charts on her computer screen. The numbers and graphs meant nothing to Jake, but she seemed excited about them. "The pups are not sick with any disease," she said. "They're suffering from something called isolation syndrome. It's a condition that affects young dragons when they don't form proper emotional bonds." She pointed to different parts of the charts. In normal draconian society, dragon pups bond with their parents through shared meals and physical contact. But these royal pups have been isolated for their own protection. The emperor was afraid that too much contact might make them sick, so only medical staff were allowed near them. Jake was confused, but the medical staff tried to feed them every day. "Yes, but it was all clinical," Dr. Park explained. "Feeding tubes, nutrient solutions, everything sterile and professional. What the pups needed was personal contact, someone who cared about them as individuals rather than as important political symbols." Captain Beck looked at Jake with new respect. "When you sat with them and shared your food, you gave them what they were missing, the emotional connection they needed to survive." Jake still didn't understand completely. "But I'm just a maintenance worker. Why would they care about me?" Dr. Park smiled. "That's exactly why it worked. You didn't treat them like precious royal children. You treated them like any young animals that needed help. You were genuine with them." Ambassador Hamilton stepped closer to Jake. "There's more. The pups have been asking for you. It's asking for me." Jake was surprised. "How can they ask for anything? They're just babies. Dragon pups are more intelligent than human babies," Dr. Park explained. "They can't speak yet, but they can communicate basic ideas. Since yesterday, all 3 pups have been making distress calls whenever you're not around. They calm down when someone mentions your name." Jake felt overwhelmed. "What does this mean?" Captain Beck answered. "It means you've become essential to this mission, Morrison. The Emperor's children have bonded with you. If you stop visiting them, they might get sick again." "But I don't know anything about taking care of dragons," Jake protested. "You know how to care about living things," Ambassador Hamilton said. "That's what matters. The Emperor is arriving tomorrow to see his children. He learns that a human saved him. It could change everything." Jake felt nervous about meeting the Emperor, but he was also worried about the pups. "Can I see them now?" "I brought them some food from the cafeteria." Dr. Park nodded. "Actually, we'd like you to spend more time with them. We're learning a lot about dragon behavior by watching how they interact with you." Jake followed Dr. Park to the containment room. As soon as he entered, all 3 pups became excited. They chirped and moved around in their containers, reaching toward him with their tiny claws. The bronze pup, which Jake had started thinking of as Ember, pressed its whole body against the glass. "Hey there, little guys," Jake said in his gentle voice. "I brought you some real food today." He had taken some grilled chicken and vegetables from the cafeteria. Pups ate eagerly, making happy sounds between bites. Jake sat on the floor next to their containers and talked to them while they ate. Telling them about his home on Earth and the animals his family had raised, Dr. Park watched from the doorway, taking notes on her computer. She was fascinated by how the pups responded to Jake's voice and presence. Their vital signs improved dramatically whenever he was around, and they showed signs of intelligence and curiosity that were remarkable for such young dragons. As Jake spent time with the pups, he began to understand that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. He was no longer just a maintenance worker. He'd become the bridge between two species, the human who could speak to dragons not with words, but with something much more powerful, genuine care and respect. The Emperor was coming, and Jake would soon learn whether his simple act of kindness would help forge an alliance that could save both human and dragon worlds from destruction. The Draconian Emperor's ship arrived like thunder in space. It was 10 times larger than the Meridian, shaped like a massive dragon with wings spread wide. Gold and silver decorations covered its hull, and energy weapons bristled from every surface. When it docked with the station, the entire structure shook. Jake was in the containment room with the pups when the Emperor's ship arrived. The 3 little dragons became restless, sensing something important was happening. Ember, the bronze. Pup kept looking toward the door and making worried chirping sounds. "It's okay, little guy," Jake said softly. "It's probably your dad coming to visit." But Jake was nervous too. He had never met anyone more important than a ship captain, and now he was about to face the ruler of an entire empire. What would he say to someone who commanded millions of dragon warriors? Captain Beck came to the medical bay an hour later. He looked worried and was wearing his best uniform. "Morrison, the Emperor wants to see his children immediately. You need to be there when he arrives." "Me?" Jake's voice cracked. "Why do I need to be there?" "Because the pups get upset when you're not around," Dr. Park explained. "We can't have them getting sick again, right when their father arrives to see them." Jake looked down at his work clothes. They were clean, but showed stains from years of maintenance work. "I should probably change clothes." "No time," Captain Beck said. "The Emperor is already on his way to the medical bay." Jake could hear footsteps. In the corridor outside, heavy footsteps that made the floor vibrate. The pups heard it too and became more excited. They pressed against the glass of their containers and made loud chirping sounds. The door to the medical bay slid open, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. Emperor Zorith the Golden was even more impressive than Jake had imagined. He was 12 feet tall, with scales that gleamed like polished gold. His eyes burned like yellow flames, and his presence filled the entire room. Behind him came several other dragons, smaller, but still much larger than any human. The Emperor's gaze swept the room, taking in the human medical equipment and the scientists standing nervously along the walls. Then his eyes found Jake, sitting on the floor next to the containment units, and Jake felt like he was being examined by a force of nature. "You are the human," the Emperor said. His voice was deep and rumbled like distant thunder. "You are the one my children have chosen?" Jake struggled to his feet. "Yes, sir. Your Majesty. He stopped talking, realizing he was making things worse. The Emperor stepped closer to the containment units. When he saw his 3 children, his fierce expression softened. The pups became very excited, chirping loudly and reaching toward their father with their tiny claws. "My sons," the Emperor said in his own language. The words sounded like music mixed with the roar of fire. The pups responded with happy chirping sounds, clearly recognizing their father's voice. But then something unexpected happened. Ember, the bronze pup, turned away from his father and looked at Jake. He made a different sound, almost like he was asking Jake to come closer. The other 2 pups did the same thing. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "They call for you, human. Even in the presence of their father, they seek your attention." Jake didn't know what to say. He could feel the tension in the room. Some of the dragon nobles behind the Emperor looked angry, as if Jake had somehow insulted their royal family. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," Jake said. "I never meant for this to happen. I was just trying to help them when they were sick." "Help them?" One of the dragon nobles stepped forward. This one had silver scales and wore jewelry that marked him as someone important. A lowly human servant dares to claim he helped royal offspring. "Lord Silverclaw," the Emperor said sharply, "be silent." The Emperor studied Jake for a long moment. "Tell me, human, how did you help my children?" "Shh." Jake felt everyone in the room watching him. "Well, Your Majesty, they seemed lonely. On my family's farm back on Earth, when young animals got sad or scared, Sometimes they just needed someone to sit with them. So I sat with your sons and shared my food with them. Shared your food, the Emperor repeated. Common human food? Yes, sir. Just a sandwich and some water. Nothing fancy. Lord Silverclaw made a sound like an angry hiss. The royal offspring were fed the finest delicacies from across the empire, yet they preferred the crude sustenance of a primitive species. Jake felt his face getting red. He didn't like being called primitive. But he didn't dare argue with a dragon lord. The Emperor held up one massive claw for silence. My advisor speaks of tradition and proper hierarchy. But I see healthy children where before there were dying pups. Look directly at Jake. Results matter more than tradition. Dr. Park stepped forward carefully. Your Majesty, if I may. Explain what we learned. Your children were suffering from isolation syndrome. They needed emotional bonding, not just medical care. Jake provided that bonding. It's emotional bonding, the Emperor said slowly. With a human, yes, Your Majesty. The pups have formed a connection with Jake that goes beyond species differences. When he's with them, their health improves dramatically. The Emperor moved closer to Jake, who had to tilt his head back to look up at the massive dragon's face. You are not afraid of me, human. Jake thought about that. He was nervous, but not really afraid. No, Your Majesty. You're just a father who loves his children. I understand that. Several of the dragon nobles made shocked sounds at Jake's casual tone, but the Emperor's eyes seemed to glow brighter. Indeed, I am a father first, an emperor second. He looked back at his children, who were still calling for Jake's attention. This creates a problem, the Emperor continued. My advisors say that royal blood should not be mixed with lesser species. They fear that contact with humans will weaken my sons. Jake looked at the three pups, who were now bigger and stronger than they had been just a few days ago. With respect, Your Majesty, your sons don't look weak to me. The Emperor followed Jake's gaze. The pups were indeed healthier than they had been since hatching. Their scales were bright, their eyes were clear, and they moved with energy and curiosity. No, the Emperor agreed. They do not look weak. Lord Silverclaw spoke again. Your Majesty, surely you do not intend to allow this human to continue corrupting the royal bloodline. The Emperor's head turned sharply toward his advisor, and Jake saw fire literally spark from his nostrils. You question my judgment, Silverclaw? Never, Your Majesty. But the other noble houses will not understand. They will say that you show weakness by accepting help from humans. Then they will learn, the Emperor said, his voice growing louder, that true strength comes from wisdom, not pride. He turned back to Jake. Human, I have a proposal for you. My sons need you, and this alliance my people are considering with yours may depend on their health and happiness. Will you accept the role of guardian to my children? Jake looked at the three pups, who were watching him with their bright golden eyes. He thought about his quiet life as a maintenance worker, and how it was about to become something completely different. Yes, Your Majesty, Jake said. I'll take care of them. The Emperor nodded. Then you are no longer a servant human. Are a guardian of the royal house, with all the honor and responsibility that position requires. Jake Morrison, the farm boy from Montana, had just become one of the most important humans in the galaxy. 3 weeks later, Jake stood in the grand ceremonial hall of the Draconian Station. The room was enormous, with a ceiling that stretched up like the inside of a mountain. Golden statues of ancient dragon warriors lined the walls, and the floor was made of polished stone that reflected the light from thousands of glowing crystals. Jake wore new clothes that the Emperor had given him. They were simple, but well made, with the symbol of the royal house embroidered on the chest. He still felt like a farm boy pretending to be something important, but the three dragon pups beside him made him feel more confident. Ember, Storm, and Ash had grown rapidly over the past weeks. They were now the size of large dogs, with wings that could actually lift them off the ground for short flights. Their scales had become brilliant and bright, and their intelligence amazed everyone who met them. Today was the formal presentation ceremony, where the young dragons would be shown to the High Council of the Draconian Empire. This ceremony would determine their place in the royal succession, and whether they were worthy to inherit their father's throne someday. Jake was nervous because he knew how important this day was. If the pups failed to impress the council, it could hurt the alliance between humans and dragons. The Void Seekers were getting closer to draconian space, and humanity desperately needed these powerful allies. The great doors of the ceremonial hall opened, and the members of the High Council entered. There were 12 ancient dragons, each one larger and more impressive than the last. Their scales showed their great age with colors like deep emeralds, ancient gold, and weathered silver. They moved slowly and with great dignity, taking their places on raised platforms around the room. Lord Silverclaw was among them, and Jake could feel the dragon's disapproval like a cold wind. Several other council members also looked skeptical about having a human present at such an important ceremony. Emperor Zorith entered last, his golden scales gleaming in the crystal light. He took his place on the highest platform and looked down at his 3 sons with obvious pride. Noble council, the Emperor's voice boomed through the hall. I present my sons heirs to the throne of Paraxis Prime. They will demonstrate their worthiness to carry on the bloodline of our ancestors. The ceremony began with traditional tests. Each pup had to show they could breathe fire, fly across the hall, and solve a puzzle that tested their intelligence. Storm went first, his silver-blue scales shimmering as he flew in perfect circles and produced flames that burned bright blue. The council members nodded with approval. Ash went next, demonstrating his ability to breathe fire that seemed to absorb light rather than create it. His flight was steady and strong, and he solved his puzzle quickly. Again, the council seemed pleased, but when Ember's turn came, something went wrong. The bronze pup had always been the smallest and most sensitive of the 3. The formal atmosphere of the ceremony, with all the ancient dragons watching him, made him nervous. His fire came out weak and orange, instead of the bright bronze it should have been. When he tried to fly, his wings shook and he could barely stay in the air. The council members began whispering among themselves. Jake could see disappointment on their faces. Lord Silverclaw leaned forward with a satisfied expression, as if he had expected this failure. Ember landed poorly and looked around the hall with frightened eyes. When he saw all the disapproving faces staring at him, he made a small, sad sound and began to back away from the center of the room. Jake felt his heart break for the little dragon. He knew that Ember was just as capable as his brothers, but the pressure of the ceremony was too much for him. Jake looked up at Emperor Zorith, who was watching with a pained expression. The Emperor loved all his sons, but he could not ignore a poor performance in front of the High Council. The smallest prince shows weakness, Lord Silverclaw announced loudly. Perhaps the human influence has corrupted his dragon nature. Other council members murmured agreement. Jake felt anger rising in his chest. These ancient dragons were judging Ember based on one bad moment. Ignoring all the progress the pup had made over the past weeks, Jake knew he was breaking protocol, but he could not stand by and watch Ember fail. He walked onto the ceremonial floor, ignoring the gasps from the council members. He approached Ember, who was now crouched low with his wings folded in shame. Hey, buddy, Jake said quietly, kneeling down next to the pup. Don't worry about all these fancy dragons watching you. Just show them what you can really do. Ember looked up at Jake with his golden eyes, and Jake saw the fear begin to fade. The little dragon pressed his head against Jake's hand, taking comfort from the familiar touch. Remember when you first flew for me? Jake continued. You were so proud, and your flames were the most beautiful bronze I'd ever seen. Show them that dragon. Jake stood up and stepped back. Ember straightened up, his confidence returning. The little dragon looked around the hall again, but this time he was not seeing disapproving judges. He was seeing an audience for his performance. What happened next amazed everyone in the hall. Ember's flames burst out in brilliant bronze fire, but mixed with other colors that no one had seen before. Copper and gold swirled through the flames, creating patterns that looked like flowing metal. When he flew, his wings moved with perfect grace, and he performed aerial maneuvers that were beyond what young dragons usually could. But the most impressive thing was what happened when Ember solved his puzzle. Instead of just finding the right answer, he found 3 different solutions and explained each one in the simple dragon speech that he had learned. His intelligence was clearly far beyond his age. Storm and Ash inspired by their brother's performance, decided to show off as well. Storm's flames began to dance with silver patterns, and Ash created fire that seemed to contain tiny stars. All three pups flew together in formation, creating a display that was both beautiful and powerful. The council members sat in stunned silence. They'd never seen young dragons perform with such skill and creativity. Even Lord Silverclaw looked impressed. Though he tried to hide it, Emperor Zoroth stood up, his voice filled with pride. "Do you see, noble council? My sons are not weakened by their bond with humans. They are strengthened by it. They have learned to think beyond our traditional ways, while keeping the best of our dragon nature." The eldest council member, an ancient dragon with emerald scales, spoke for the group. "Your Majesty, these princes show promise beyond anything we have seen in generations. The human guardian has indeed brought out abilities we did not know existed." Jake felt relief wash over him. The pups had passed their test, and more importantly, they had shown the dragons that working with humans could make them stronger, not weaker. After the ceremony, Emperor Zoroth approached Jake. "Guardian Morrison, you have given my sons something no dragon could teach them. You have shown them that true strength comes from caring for others, not from standing above them." Jake looked at the three pups, who were now playing together happily. "They taught me things too, Your Majesty. They showed me that friendship can cross any distance, even between different worlds." The Emperor nodded. "The alliance between our peoples is sealed. Together, we will face the Void Seekers and any other threat that comes. And my sons will grow up knowing that the universe is full of friends, not just enemies." As Jake watched Ember, Storm, and Ash playing together, he realized that his simple act of kindness had changed everything. He was no longer just a maintenance worker from a small farm on Earth. He was a bridge between two great civilizations, and the guardian of three little dragons who would someday rule the stars. The farm boy from Montana had found his place in the galaxy, and it was exactly where he belonged.